June's been crazy so far. Let's see what else it's got to throw at me. Oh, dang. Good morning, YouTube. Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully you guys are having a good start to the day. This is going to be a long video because there is a lot to cover here. So before I get into it, make sure you're hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, decimating that share button, by the way, too, because this is going to be an interesting stretch down the line. I'm not going to do a super long range forecast because of how much there is to cover. There is an enhanced risk for severe weather today, including a 5% tour area across Oklahoma and parts of the southern plains in particular. I also see Kansas in there too. We also have a major threat for wind and hail too, so we will be going live later this afternoon to cover this. But let's not forget that this place over here towards the Gulf Coast has been getting slammed over the last few days with tornadoes, damaging winds, and hail too. So over towards Mobile, Pensacola again, unfortunately. We're going to be keeping an eye on you guys. And then over towards Abilene, we're watching for a hail threat as well. Main damaging wind threat is mainly going to be towards southwestern Kansas and through a large chunk of Oklahoma here. Can't discount anyone in the panhandle of Texas or even anyone outside of the hatched risk areas, but that's the main area I'm concerned with right now. There's actually another enhanced risk for tomorrow, but I'm not going to go into detail with that because we also have the tropics to cover, as you can see here. But anyway, another concern that I have, and while this hasn't really updated in a while, threat for flooding across the Florida panhandle around the Big Bend towards Mobile. There's been a lot of storms over the last few days over these regions, and these storms have dropped plenty of rain, I'm sure. So I do see some potential for the Weather Prediction Center maybe increasing that to a slight risk. I do also see some potential for maybe a slight risk upgrade over here towards maybe even Dallas, because these areas have had storms go over here repeatedly, I should say. So yeah, that's getting pretty crazy right now. June's definitely on some different type stuff. It's not like it's not the June that we typically would expect, especially on an El Nino year. But that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the wind pattern. This is going to be a big factor in the setup today. I'm actually going to go ahead and start by looking at the upper level winds. I'm so used to actually looking at the mid-level winds from May that I sometimes forget to look at this level, which is really important sometimes. Very weak trough though, but there is a little bit of a maximum here where we're starting to get to that 60 knots range. And on the flank of this is where I would expect some of the damaging winds to be occurring. I also see some potential for a dry line setup, but we'll get into that when we look at the dew points. But all the parameters do seem like they're starting to come together here. And this really starts to ramp up around the evening hours, around 8 o'clock plus 8 o'clock into 9 o'clock, so to speak. So definitely concerned about areas like Oklahoma City as we head later into the evening with the potential for those storms to really start ramping up. As we get towards the overnight, I do expect this to calm down a bit. Probably will be left with some damaging winds well after the storms pass, at least into the early morning hours. Maybe by afternoon tomorrow, this might calm down over these regions, but we'll have to wait and see. We look towards the mid-levels. This is going to probably be where our lifting mechanism will be in this case. That trough at the upper level isn't that strong. So really this is why I tend to look towards the mid-levels more. I've got to make sure I have the time frame for you guys. This will be around lunchtime for these guys here in the Central Plains. But look what happens as we get towards 22, 23Z. Right here is going to be that shortwave that we're looking for. And there might be a secondary one here. It's kind of hard to tell with the number in the way. But these two are probably going to be the catalyst behind these storms firing and really starting to take off from that point. So it's going to be interesting to see how things unfold there. There's actually some pretty strong mid-level winds here. We're getting up above 60 knots, so getting a little bit dangerous there. Usually that's a telltale sign of damaging wind potential, sometimes even tornadoes, but I don't think the low level kinematics are going to be feasible for a lot of tornado development. Then again, things have been very weird this year and really even this month. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, I should say. But there is a little pocket right here where we're getting up to about 50 to 60 knots. Depending on the storm mode, maybe we could see some supercells early and more tornado potential. Really hoping it doesn't get towards this area over here, because this is where Perryton, Elk City, places that have been hit within this week, are possibly under the gun once again. So we're seeing that racing forward here. So this is also another concern, another reason as to why I'm so concerned about damaging wind potential. And really, when I look at that, of course, really when I look at that, even though if I click on it directly, nothing's to occur with that. There's a cap, all that other, there's a cap in the stable area. It's off to the southeastern flank of that is where I'm concerned about the weather. Golly. But that being said, though, we're going to be keeping an extra close eye on this. And these storms probably could persist into the evening as well, considering the fact that this starts to strengthen as we head into the overnight. So I'm a little bit concerned about maybe even a derecho. It's a little bit bold for me to say, but to see the low-level jets strengthen like that as we get into the overnight hours, and there's still a decent amount of instability at this time, which we'll look at in just a second, that could be a sign of things to come here. Now, onto the dew points, another key dynamic, another key parameter, so to speak, when it comes to severe development. Not as much of a dry line setup as I was expecting. The dry line doesn't, there is a boundary here, but it doesn't really move. But that being said here, over towards this region where we have the moist sector and that lifting mechanism, we definitely have our reasons to be concerned for severe weather here. But dew points are also really rich over towards these regions. We even have a little small stripe of 70s over here that's just to the south of Oklahoma City and Norman. That's something that I do find concerning. I think all the parameters exist for these storms to really persist into the evening and travel pretty long distance once it becomes a QLCS. So definitely need to be on the lookout for that. So the next thing we're going to do here is go ahead and take a look at the CAPE. This is the energy that's available in the atmosphere for storms. And as you can see, there's plenty of it. We're at about 2,000 plus joules per kilogram. Not the highest CAPE that we've seen in comparison to recent times, but nonetheless, more than sufficient enough to cause some major problems. And as we go into the evening here, especially over towards Oklahoma City, this CAPE really starts to ramp up here. We're getting to about 4,000 joules. Oh, okay. That's actually an interesting sounding there. I wasn't expecting that. This is where the low-level jet starts to ramp up, and with that, we actually have a really interesting sounding here. Like I said, there's plenty of CAPE available, but with that low-level jet spiking like that, that is very concerning. The fact that it says PDS Tour is very concerning, and the timing no less. This would be after sunset, and this is around the Oklahoma City area, so we're going to be keeping an extra close eye on this. Also, let's keep note of the hail sounding here. We have what looks to be baseball-sized hail here. Also, damaging wind potential is usually indicated best by this parameter right here, DCAPE. Usually, you would look for this number to be at 1,000. We're at 1,328. So, like I said, all the parameters are in place for yet another severe outbreak in Oklahoma and the Southern Plains here tonight. So it's going to be an interesting and probably a long stream. So hopefully you guys join in and buckle up, because who knows just what the heck we might see. So one other thing to look at here would be the significant tornado parameter here. Sometimes during the lower end parameter events, I don't really look at this too much, simply because of the fact that this just looks at what tornadic conditions could be like as a whole here. But right around this time, it pretty much matches up with some of the other parameters here, so there's actually validity to this. But sometimes it could have high values in somewhere like Idaho where there's no storms expected. That's the main thing to remember if you are someone that would end up making a YouTube video like this. With a significant tornado parameter, you don't want to use it much unless you're confident in a chance of tornadoes developing within an area. And you also got to add that disclaimer in too. Not me clearing my throat, by the way. But anyway, another area to keep note of is right over here towards the coast here, towards maybe Biloxi and Mobile. Some pretty high values there, but kinematically it's not that impressive. Not saying that this can't happen, but it's something that I wouldn't read too far into over for these areas. You do have a slight risk over here, so it's not like it can't. Like I said, it's not like it can't happen. But I definitely would be more concerned if you are in Oklahoma, maybe even south of Oklahoma City here. But parameters are going to start to decrease, especially with the potential for these storms to mainly be in a more linear type mode. So last thing we'll look at here is the reflectivity or composite reflectivity. This is a good idea of what the radar could look like today. HRRR is a pretty reliable model for that. It's been doing a pretty good job in the last few outbreak setups here. So we do get some early supercell development here towards the Panhandle, Oklahoma. That's a little bit concerning. What I'm really concerned about is the potential for any supercells that form over here. Any supercells that form towards Oklahoma City, especially to the south here, that's where I think the greatest concern for tornadic activity would be. Seems like there's still some prefrontal storms as we head into the overnight hours before this finally condenses into a full-on bow echo here from the looks of it. You can tell by the little backwards C shape here. That's a good indicator of the winds and the outflow rushing forward. So pretty strong winds possible for sure tonight. So again, this is going to be a really interesting setup. But wait, we aren't done. Now we go to the Atlantic and we see this. Now, what I will say is that normally I'm not too surprised to see tropical development in June. It's not unheard of. But where this is developing is a bit of a shock. It's a bit of a throw. And the reason I say that is because normally during June and July, we're looking a lot closer to the Gulf states. Not even really the Caribbean would be quote-unquote open for business, so to speak. It's always more towards the Gulf or just off the Atlantic coast here. This, however, is in the main development region. Usually not until late July into August do we start to see this area open up. But conditions are actually pretty favorable over this region for things to start to pop off here. And it's going to be that way for a little bit here. Let's go ahead and look at some ensemble runs here. And what you'll notice is this is our tropical wave right here. Watch what happens as I move forward. It actually holds up really well, because normally during this time of year the wind shear is so intense over this region these storms don't even get a chance, but it seems this storm has found a little pocket here to hold out in. So I'm going to be looking at two ensemble models, by the way. I'm going to be looking at the GFS ensemble, and I'm going to look at what I would guess would be the European style ensemble. So this storm makes it to the Caribbean. We may even have to watch this as it heads towards maybe Puerto Rico and even Hispaniola itself, which would be Haiti and Dominican Republic. But it doesn't look that impressive so far. Keep in mind, though, these tropical systems can change at the drop of a dime. So the further out we go, don't put too much weight behind this, or don't just take it with a grain of salt, so to speak. But fact in the matter is, I'm seeing these little tiny little yellow circles. This is an indicator of vorticity, by the way, something that you would see in tropical systems. And you see these little tiny yellow dots here developing. So I think that there's a few opportunities coming up here for a few tropical waves to come off the West African coast here. Now, will these hit land? That's still something that I wouldn't be able to answer. That's a question I wouldn't be able to answer. But the fact that we're seeing this so early is very interesting. So if you are in a hurricane-prone area, let's be keeping an eye on this because we don't know where this is going to go yet. It's too far out to tell. Probably not going to know for at least a good 3 to 5 days minimum. Could even be longer than that. And then, of course, the potential for other systems existing as well. That also needs to be watched. So I'm going to try to find I can't speak. I'm going to try to find a way to balance out the severe weather madness along with the tropics as best as I can. Can't guarantee it'll be great, but I'm going to give it my best. I'm going to give it my best shot. That's all I can really say there. But as a whole, though, this is what the wind shear pattern looks like over the tropical Atlantic right now. Here's our current storm system. See, notice how it's in this little pocket here. You want the wind shear to be as light as possible for tropical development. If you're in the blue, it can work out. Once you get into the green, it gets a lot harder. Once you're in the yellow, orange, and red, you can forget it. But look, it just has that little pocket to ride in here as it goes towards the Caribbean here. And that pocket even exists through the Caribbean. I was expecting even this area to the south of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, to be relatively intense when it comes to wind shear. At least that was the forecast for this year. However, it seems that, like I said, with the way we've switched rapidly from a weak La Nina to a strong El Nino, is definitely having an influence on our wind pattern over here towards the Atlantic. So even though we say it could be a near normal or below average season, we were expecting an above average season last year. So like I said, don't put too much weight behind these forecasts right now as far as in general is concerned, because the weather's doing its own little thing right now. So let's make sure that we are staying weather aware throughout hurricane season and really throughout, well, this summer, because who knows? I'm honestly kind of at a loss for words in the way this month has been. This is probably one of the last things I was expecting to have happen. But that being said here, we're looking now is at the ensemble member pressures. Basically, this goes off the likelihood of a system developing. These red numbers are low pressure, right? And the more numbers that you see packed in closer together within a circle like this, within this isobar, the higher the likelihood of a storm developing. So what we see here is this is our current tropical wave. So there's pretty good confidence in this, especially while they have the 70% out. But notice right behind this, here's another system. Not as many numbers around it, but not as many members, so to speak, around it. But it does increase as time goes on. And then another one right behind that. With that wind pattern being as it is over the tropical Atlantic, it does give rise to the opportunity for additional tropical waves to develop. Depending on how the wind pattern goes will determine whether or not they make close passes or even impacts to land. I may want to, if you're in Bermuda, I may watch you for a bit here, because we don't know for sure as to whether or not any of these will make close passes or impacts, but this will definitely increase the surf for you guys at the very least. Now, I could probably see the same thing on the European ensemble here. If we look, it's a pretty similar deal. This is the vorticity, pretty much the same exact thing. Maybe a couple less tropical waves, but not too much different there. So as a whole, we're seeing model agreement between the ensembles pretty early and, well, pretty late through their runs right now. Whether this trend continues is yet to be seen here, but the fact that we are seeing a trend at all definitely is an eyebrow raiser for sure. Doesn't mean that anything apocalyptic or crazy is going to happen, but surely this isn't something that should be ignored either. But as time goes on here, it's a pretty similar deal. Wind shear kind of retreats a little bit to the north, and we have this pocket to work with where multiple tropical waves can develop. And then really, if we look at the members, it's also a pretty similar deal. Gotta go back a bit here. There's our current tropical low right there. And then as we go forward, here's additional tropical waves beginning to move around. See? So we're going to be having to keep a close eye on this. Like I said, a lot of work ahead for me. So, like I said before at the beginning of the video, make sure you're hitting that like button, hitting that, decimating that subscribe button, and face kicking that share button as well. Also, if you have any questions in the comments, feel free to fire away. I'll answer as many as I can, in as timely of a manner as I can. But that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this video and you found it useful. I'm going to get out of here and get ready for the stream later tonight. Until then, this has been Metalhead Weatherman. I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I hope to see you in the next one.